Good afternoon, everybody.
Good afternoon.
Nice to see you. Thank you for coming. Before we hear our speaker, working ethnographer Bill LeVasseur, he's going to present Masked Ceremonies in Mexico and Latin America. I'd like first to welcome all in attendance, including friends, colleagues, and especially students from Villanova and the Coatesville Middle School. Shout out to Coatesville. And their chaperones, Ms. Pat Miller, ESL teacher. Where is she? Over here. Ms. Omi Mendez, ESL assistant. ¿Dónde está usted? Allá. Mrs. Lori Glackman, ESL teacher. And Ms. Pat Kuhn, librarian. I also want to acknowledge the support of Professor Satya Patnaik. Where is he? Is he here? Because he has to teach. I know he may not. There he is, right there. Who helped with funding to bring our speaker to you today. As head of Latin American Studies Center, Dr. Patnaik provided funds from a Department of Education grant for today's presentation. We also thank Louise Griffin from Connelly Center Services for the use of the cinema for the next hour and a half. I also want to thank Dan Trussell for his production assistance. We're so happy to have everyone here. You're in for a treat. I say this because what you're about to hear is a wonderful presentation about a fascinating topic, mask use in human cultures, with special emphasis on mask performance, ritual, and ceremonial dance in Mesoamerica among indigenous populations. Several videos of ceremonies featuring performed masks are included, and some masks are on display. We'll also have the opportunity for a little bit of Q&A at the end. We have some mics I can pass around. This presentation will be of special interest to those in Latin American studies, cultural studies, performance, theater, and really anyone who's interested in how human beings express themselves in line with their unique cultural heritage. Our speaker, Bill LeVasseur, comes to us from San Miguel de Allende, which is a small city in the Mexican area of Guanajuato, a province northwest of Mexico City. As a working ethnographer for over 15 years, Bill has traveled to some of the most remote areas of Mexico to seek out indigenous groups, to observe their ceremonies, rituals, and other activities that have been with deep religious and cultural roots. With a degree in economics and a previous 30-year career in advertising, Bill now conducts ethnographic research and has, for the last 10 years or more, created with his artist wife Heidi a museum in his current home in San Miguel. The mask collection that now makes up a major feature of his museum now exceeds 500 masks, all of which have been performed. Bill's museum is now a destination for school and field trips for school children throughout the area. But you need not travel that far. We've brought Bill here for you today. So sit back and listen and watch and let yourself go on a cultural tour covering centuries of our history as our speaker, Bill LeVasseur, presents Masked Ceremonies in Mexico and Latin America.
Thank you very much for coming. They're going to record this and podcast it, so I have to put on this microphone. Micrófono. So bear with me. Thank you, Len, for the undeserved introduction. I hope in an hour and a half I will have deserved it. That looks funny. It's a humbling experience for me to speak to at a university. I don't have a degree in anthropology, so it's fairly humbling to be in front of academia. I'm a collector of Mexican ceremonial masks. I've spent over 20 years collecting masks. As Len mentioned, I travel all over Mexico and to very remote places to witness the ceremonies and try to acquire masks. But more probably in the last 10 years or so, I've become much more interested in the use of the mask. So I do what you would call ethnography. It's really interviewing mask makers, interviewing dancers, interviewing the elder people in the village to understand the use of the mask and mask ceremony. So I still collect, but my focus is now more on the context of use of the masks. And a special thanks to Satya Patnaik for inviting me, and with Len, to come up from Mexico. I flew up yesterday. And so I hope you find this interesting. And again, thanks to Dan. I'm not able to walk to walk and chew gum, to click and talk at the same time. So Dan is going to take you through the slide presentation. I'm going to show you 5 dances at the end of the presentation, 5 ceremonial dances, and I hope there's enough time for you to ask me questions and for me to make up the answers. Some important people in the audience here. I'm nervous enough as it is talking at a university, but now I want you to know my mother-in-law's in the audience. Yeah, Sally Hawkins from Wilmington, Delaware. Sally's right here. She founded WILM Radio a few years ago, and her son John, my brother-in-law, is here, and he is the CEO and president of ABC Advertising in Wilmington, Delaware. And so there'll be a seminar after this. After my talk, there'll be a seminar on careers in advertising if you want to stick around. Okay. My sister-in-law Tink is here with her 2 friends Shirley and Helen. So this is like family reunion. Yeah. So thank you all for coming, and I hope you enjoyed the talk. Okay. There's an important quote here from a very important person in anthropology, Claude Levi-Strauss, who actually passed away exactly a year ago at the age of 101. He was a pioneer in studying myth and mask use in culture around the world. And it's important that I read you this quote and you read it. He said, "Masks, like myths, cannot be interpreted on their own and in their own right as if they were isolated objects. Rather, masks should be studied in context for their role to be understood. The dances themselves need to be analyzed and their meaning examined." This is what I'm going to do to you today. I'm going to talk about mask use in culture in general. Why does man mask? Why has man masked for 30,000 years? Talk a little bit about mask use in Mesoamerica or Mexico before the conquest, what was going on before Cortez came in 1519. Then I'm going to talk to you about the influence of the European influence and the influence of the Catholic Church on masked ceremony in Mexico. Then I'm going to digress a little bit and tell you about the indigenous presence in Mexico today, contemporary Mexico, and the various indigenous groups that populate the country. Then we're going to show you 5 dances, and I'll answer any questions you have. I own a collection of about 1,000 masks, give or take, and I travel frequently to the interior of Mexico to observe the dances. A few years ago, I decided to install the collection of about 500 masks in a museum and properly curated, so that other people could appreciate this other face of Mexico that you really don't see when you visit the beach resorts of Mexico or you go to the big cities. Or it's really very much a rural phenomenon, and so it requires traveling in some very remote places to witness these dances. And basically, mass dancing is practiced by indigenous populations. And some of the places I go are extremely remote, and I do a lot of sleeping in the car, to tell you the truth. I'm in places that nowhere near a town where there'd be anything that would resemble a hotel or a motel. Well, it took a while for me to find a suitable location for the museum, and I opened it to the public in February of 2007. There are three pictures of the interior of the museum, and I'd like to invite you all to San Miguel de Allende to visit it. I'm particularly proud that the educational system in my village, San Miguel de Allende, saw this museum as an opportunity to expose young students to their indigenous past. And the fact is that in the official school curriculum in Mexico, there's not much dealt with after Cortez conquers Montezuma. It's almost as if there are no more Indians left in Mexico, and the students start studying about the independence movement from Spain. So it's very important that this museum is an opportunity for these, at least the kids in my area, to understand a little bit about their indigenous past. So what usually happens, a busload of sixth graders come at 9 in the morning, they see the museum. They have an educational program that I helped design with the school administration, where they actually have to go back into the museum and do what would be a scavenger hunt and answer questions about indigenous culture. And then we have a mask making workshop. They go up to the upper terrace, and we have all kinds of recycled material for them that they can make masks and take home and show their parents. So, and that happens almost every week during the school season. And this is the result of some of their work. Why did our human ancestors make and wear masks? What are the fundamental reasons why masking has been part of our history and our prehistory? And why has the practice of masquerading persisted in many, many cultures, not just in Mesoamerica, to this day? Masking has been intrinsically involved in the development of human society. Homo sapiens have used masks in ceremony for at least 30,000 years. Prehistoric drawings on cliffs and cave surfaces provide some of the earliest records of masking. Archaeologists have observed cave paintings and rock paintings depicting masquerading in every inhabited continent. Paleolithic hunters put on animal heads and skins as decoys to get closer to their prey. Rituals were performed before and after the hunt to petition the spirit's blessing for a safe and successful outcome. In these prehistoric societies, the mask assumed the role of conduit between the temporal world and the spiritual world, and became part of a sacred ritual. And perhaps the mask itself became sacred or shamanistic. Early humans probably understood opposition, transformation, and paradox, that new life can evolve from death. And one way to negotiate with the spirit realm is through the masquerade. Masking turns the world upside down. The invisible spirit becomes visible, and the visible individual disappears. By taking the sights and sounds of the natural world, animated by the world of the spirit, and reproducing it in a controlled environment with an audience, humans felt empowered. This empowerment provided the necessary confidence to assign meaning to a confusing world, a world that was on the verge of chaos, danger, and death. The masked and masked celebrations provided security in an unpredictable world. It allowed for human emotion to be displayed and negotiated in times of great stress. Masked pageantry and dancing were important aspects of ceremonial practices in Mexico long before the Spanish conquest in the early 16th century. Archaeological evidence of mask use goes back to at least 1000 BC among the highly developed civilizations of the Olmec, Zapotec, Mixtec, and Maya. Chronicles written by the various groups of Catholic friars during the early colonial period describe a variety of ethnic groups, each with highly developed forms of political, social, and religious practices, including a range of mass dance festivals that took place at specific times during the pre-Columbian calendar year. These festivals were intended to honor the deities or spirits who in turn would bless the people with abundant rain, fertile crops, healthy and fertile animals, successful harvests, all of course leading to good health. Changes in the agricultural cycle, the beginning of the rainy season, preparation for or completion of the harvest were all occasions for petitioning the gods for abundant crops and using mask ritual. Masks often included icons representing fertility, fecundity, symbols for water and blood. Individual life passages were also a time to petition the spirits' good graces. Naming of a child, adolescent initiation and transition to adulthood, bestowing of rank or authority, marriage and death were all times to celebrate renewal, and many cultures employed masked dancing and ritual sacrifice to reach out to the spiritual world. Masks have been used throughout the evolution of human society and culture, which to me is an indication of how important they are as an expression of our humanity, as being reflective, conceptualizing, curious, and spiritual beings. In this sense, masks help us define mankind and culturally distinguish us from our other upright ancestors. Masks were often representations of spirits. In the Aztec civilization, Tonatiuh, the sun god, or Tlaloc, the rain god, for example. Groups of young men and women received professional training as dancers, and they portrayed masked characters such as wise old men, hunters, animals, and sea creatures. The Spanish chronicles describe a variety of masks worn during these ceremonies, those used by priests to impersonate the various deities, helmet masks depicting eagles and jaguars, representing the two elite groups of the warring Aztec forces. While highly religious or spiritual in nature, these mass rituals also serve another very important function. It's a social function, as an expression of community spirit, an expression of unity within a group or neighborhood, basically a community's celebration of themselves. Mass performance are a means of informal enculturation, where the system of social values and moral behavior is passed on from the older generation to the newer one. Today, the social function of masked dancing has in many cases persisted to the exclusion of the purely religious or spiritual function, and is one very important reason why masking and dances are so important today in Mexico and throughout Latin America. While my talk today will focus on Mexico, I do want to point out that all of what is now Mexico and Central America and South America started to be colonized at approximately the same time. There was probably a 30 or 40 year period between 1519 roughly and 1540 where all this land was first colonized by the Spanish and Portuguese. The two driving forces behind this vast geographic conquest were, in two simple words, gold and God. Catholic evangelization, converting and therefore saving souls, coupled with a powerful economic motive. And this movement to evangelize had a profound effect on native customs and ritual practices, and of course the manner in which masks and masked dances were used by the native population, as we're going to see later this afternoon. Primarily Spanish and Portuguese came to the New World, known as the Indies, along with the Catholic brotherhoods, including the Dominicans, Franciscans, Augustinians, Benedictines, Carmelites, Jesuits, all with the intent to convert as many souls as possible to Christianity. In 1537, the Pope ordered that the natives of the New World be brought to Christ by the preaching of the divine word and with the example of the good life. But, despite the similarities in timing of arrival and the motive of the conquistadores and the Catholic Church and the brotherhoods, there was a huge difference, territory to territory, in what the colonists found when they arrived. For a point of interest, let me let me briefly contrast Mexico with Brazil. Brazil, at the time of first contact with the Portuguese, was estimated to have roughly 2,000 different tribes, all hunter-gatherer societies, surviving by foraging, hunting, and fishing, with little or no animal domestication or agriculture. Contrast this with the advanced corn, bean, squash, and chili cultivation discovered by the Spanish when they arrived in Mesoamerica. Brazilian natives were, by any definition, primitive, and in some cases practiced cannibalism. There were no empires to topple, as were found in Mexico, among the Aztec, Zapotec, or Totonacos. There was no trace of previously highly developed cultures or society found in Mexico with the Olmecs or Toltecs or Mayas. Mexico at the time of the conquest had about 300 different indigenous groups, each with their own language. In what is today Mexico, the newly arrived Europeans discovered societies that had written languages, mathematics, highly developed and organized social and governmental structures, decorative art, an understanding of the cosmos, and an annual calendar. None of this existed in Brazil, in the Amazon. The conquest of Brazil was a long and drawn-out process that spread out over decades, centuries, and over a vast territory. By contrast, Tenochtitlan, the capital city of Mexico, fell after 2 years after Cortes arrived. In 2007, the Brazilian government published a report that said that there are today over 67 undiscovered tribes in the Amazon jungle, more than in New Guinea. To dramatize the point, I just want you to keep in mind that the photographs you're looking at were not taken by a conquistador with a digital camera. These are contemporary photographs. So perhaps someday I can come back and talk to you more about mask use and mask ceremony in other parts of Latin America, but today we're going to focus on Mexico. Okay? I'll take your questions after I finish talking. Okay? So what are the key influences that have reshaped mask ritual and dance in Mexico today? Well, let's go back to 1519, and here comes Hernan Cortes with 400 conquistadores. He had focused on two objectives: an economic conquest, and inconveniently for the native population requiring a military conquest, subjugation, and slaughter, which of course was aided by diseases brought to the New World by the Spaniards and their animals, rhinoviruses, smallpox, measles, yellow fever, and influenza, which were responsible for probably the majority of the native population reduction. So it was a military conquest or an economic conquest and a religious conquest, the evangelization of all of New Spain. Remember that Cortes had a few sword-wielding friars with him when he arrived, and they came in droves during the early colonial period to quickly evangelize all of Mexico. The worshiping of native gods was forbidden, idols were destroyed, laws were passed by the vice-regal governments that imposed whipping as punishment for anybody who put on a mask for whatever purpose. These laws, though, were not usually enforced, and where they were, the natives would run into the woods and perform their masked rituals, their masked ceremonies. Their gods were not easily displaced. And frankly, some of the dances I see today, you still see vestiges of pre-Hispanic belief system and worshiping of deities that are mixed in with the Catholic rituals. It's very syncretic. And it didn't take the religious and governmental authorities too long to recognize that mass ceremonies and mass dancing were a very effective way to teach these simple people the basic tenets of the Catholic Church. Determined to promote the Catholic faith, the friars harnessed the indigenous fondness for mass dancing by developing short plays to teach the Indians the basic historical events in the Catholic liturgical calendar. The birth of Christ at Christmas, the Passion of Christ at Easter, Holy Week, the celebration of the deceased and the deceased saints at All Souls Day and All Saints Day, And these plays incorporated masked actors, the Indians themselves portraying the principal biblical characters as well as the archetypes of evil. The Pharisees, the sect of Jews who were responsible for turning Christ over to the Romans to be crucified, the devil, the Antichrist, and the Moors, the Islamic Moors. These were archetypes of non-Christian in Mexican dances, and these archetypes persist today. These reenactments also featured dialogue, music, and dance, not only for teaching purposes, but to draw as wide an audience as possible with a promise of entertainment. Teaching the Catholic religion and morality plays through masked theater spawned a whole new menu of masked dances in post-conquest Mexico that continue to this day, and which I'm going to show you in a moment. These contemporary masks you're looking at are a direct byproduct of the effort to teach through theater and dance. But before I show you contemporary dances, I want you to meet two people that I know pretty well. The lady on the left is Claudia Delgado. She lives and works in San Miguel de Allende. If you ask her nationality, she'd say she's Mexican, and she speaks Spanish and a little English. The lady on the right is Luisa Ramos. That picture was taken in my house. She works in San Miguel also, where I live, but commutes from her village. If you ask her nationality, she would say, Yo soy Otomí, I'm Otomí. And her language is Otomí, and she speaks a little Spanish. They are both Mexican citizens. They were both born in Mexico, and they still live in the same country, but they live in two different worlds. Luisa is indigenous. How do you define indigenous? The simple answer is you do. The blood mix in Mexico is all mixed up. It's all mestizaje, but people identify themselves as indigenous based on how they feel and how they live and how they work. Alan Sandstrom is a noted anthropologist, and he says that an Indian is anyone who identifies himself or herself as such, chooses to use an indigenous language in their daily speech, remains actively involved in village communal affairs, participates in religious ceremonies rooted in native traditions, and attempts to achieve a harmony rather than control over the social and natural worlds. And according to the 2005 the last national census in Mexico, of 107 million Mexicans, 12 million, when asked the question, what's your nationality, answered the question based on how they live, not where they live. It would be like asking a Kurd in Turkey, what's your nationality? A Kurd would say, I'm Kurdish. They know they live in Turkey. And it's the same in Mexico. There are more than 1 out of 10 Mexicans today. Folks, this is 488 years after the conquest. Still 1 out of 10 Mexicans, or more than 1 out of 10 Mexicans, when asked the question, what's your nationality, would answer, Yo soy Yaqui, Yo soy Maya, Yo soy Tojalabal, Yo soy Chol, Yo soy Maya, Yo soy Amuzgo. These are subcultures. And again, they're identifying their nationality. When they hear the word nationality, they're thinking nationhood, not statehood. It's fascinating. And this is the world that I have the honor to travel in to see these mass ceremonies. Go on. And the primary criteria for this self-identification of being indigenous is the language these people use in their daily lives, and it's usually not Spanish, right? Although most of these people can speak Spanish, it's their second language. About 8 million Mexicans speak a native language day to day. In fact, Mexico, with 62 living languages, uses more native languages than China, with 54, and slightly less than India, with 65. These aren't dialects, folks. These are languages, separate languages. That's pretty impressive when you consider the relative population size of these countries. Here's the breakout of the top 5 languages, native languages spoken in Mexico. There's still over 1.5 million people who speak the same language that Montezuma spoke almost 500 years ago. There are 5 Mayan languages, but Maya, by the way, you're one ahead of me. You got to go back. Thank you. Maya, almost 900,000 people. That's Yucatec Maya. There's also 8 other Mayan languages spoken in Mexico. Maya is a language family. Like we'd say Romance language or Germanic language, Maya is a language family. And the languages are Tojalabal, Chol, Chontal, Setzil, Tzotzal, Huasteco, and Zoque. These are 9, and Maya. The confusing part is one of the 9 Mayan languages is called Maya. Life's not easy. We can go on to the next slide. And there are 5 states in Mexico. Of the 32 states in Mexico, 5 states, roughly a third or more of the population identifies as being indigenous. In the Yucatan, almost 60% of the population would say, "Yo soy Maya." Right? And the overriding condition that has existed for centuries and continues to drive the existence of these indigenous subcultures can be summarized in one word: isolation. These people have been marginalized through geographic, economic, and educational isolation. From the perspective of someone like myself who travels and visits with these people and appreciates their cultural heritage, you might say that a very bad thing, a very good thing rather, exists for very bad reasons. These people are very marginalized, still in Mexican society. In my travels to Mexico to observe masked ceremonies, interview mask makers and leaders of dance groups, and acquire masks, I have met many wonderful and warm people. They have social structures and kinship group relationships that go back hundreds of years. They wear traditional dress of their culture, prepare and eat foods that are made with recipes of their ancestors. I am a gringo living in Mexico. I don't find this just interesting, I find it absolutely fascinating. Now we're going to show you some masked dances. Contemporary masked dances in Mexico can be classified into 5 categories. All of us want to put things in boxes, so there are 5 boxes for you to put the dances in, but I will tell you right from the get-go that this is an oversimplification, because many of the dances reflect different categories. But for purposes of my talk today, I will define the dances in 5 categories. Historical dances relate to events that have occurred in Mexican history, such as the Dance of the Conquest, depicting Cortes overthrowing Montezuma, or the celebration of the Battle of Cinco de Mayo, where Mexican forces defeated the invading French in 1862. And the tequila companies decided they used it as a marketing ploy. Christian dances dramatize the triumph of Christianity over any other belief. The Dance of the Moors and Christians is the best example, which I will discuss and show you later. All dances reenacting important Bible stories, such as the celebration of the birth of Christ or the Passion of Christ during Easter or Day of the Dead ceremonies. These are all examples of Christian dances. There are occupational dances reflecting the skills and livelihood of the participants. There's a dance of the fishermen, or the dance of the fish. There are a dance of the tlacoloreros, or the dance of the farmers, are good examples of occupational dances. Another broad category of dances as agricultural dances. These are dances that relate to weather control, fertility of crops, and the protection of domestic farm animals. Here are 2 masks from the dance of the tecuanes. Tecuane means savage beast in the language of Nahuatl. And they're from the state of Guerrero. And the dance acts out the pursuit and killing of a jaguar who is threatening the farmer's animals. The character on the right is the rastrero, or tracker of the jaguar. And the last category is, in broad category, is entertainment-oriented dances. These dances are designed to amuse or to teach social lessons. Dances that are entertainment-oriented dances would be carnival celebrations, the dance of the Manueles, which is a spoof of Spaniards, and the dance of the Juan Negros. And as again, I said oversimplification because many of the dances bridge more than one of these 5 categories. So I'm now going to show you the first dance. This is the dance of the Curpites. Curpite means, in the language spoken by the native population, Curpite, and by the way, it's from Michoacan. It means those who bring us together. Curpite. The dance of the Curpites predates the arrival of the Spanish and was a dance celebration honoring the priest Tatakiri, who represents wisdom that comes with age. Today, the Tatakiri character has been transformed into a representation of Saint Joseph, who was accompanied by the Virgin Mary, known in the dance as the Maringuilla. The dance today is performed at the Feast of the Epiphany, which is known in Mexico as King's Day, Dia de los Reyes, King's Day, in early January. What's happening, and what is not obvious in the dance, is that our 2 principal characters, accompanied by Curpites, are looking for the newborn baby Jesus, which has been lost. They seek and finally find him. You will not see this in this dance. These dances that I'm showing you are clips, 2 or 3 minute, 3 or 4 minute clips of dances that I've filmed over the years, and these dances, many of them take hours and hours and hours. And what I've done is tried to condense for viewers and for people who visit the museum, I've condensed these dances into small edits, right? What is unusual in the dance you're about to see is that the character of Mary is performed by a woman. That's very unusual, something it's exceptional, since almost no other dances in Mexico, men actually put on a mask and dance. The other interesting thing about this dance is all the male characters in the dance are bachelors. They're not allowed to be married when they're performing when they perform this dance. The dance you're about to see was filmed in the village of San Juan Nuevo, and for the villagers in this village, this is probably the most important event of the year. This is probably bigger than World Cup soccer or Christmas or Easter. Different teams of dancers from the different neighborhoods in this village participate for prizes, and each dance group of Curpites has their own cheerleaders. Watch this. The second dance is, this is the celebration of Easter, Semana Santa, in Sonora, by the Yaqui Indian, the Mayos, Mayos. I mentioned earlier the great sacrifice the dancers endure when participating in mass ceremonies. Perhaps the Mayo and Yaqui Indians in Sonora and Sinaloa best represent the idea of sacrifice. The dancers you're about to see perform as Pharisees, the persecutors of Christ. And they do this all during the 40 days of Lent, leading up to Holy Week. You will see a Mayo native reenactment of the hunt for Jesus. They track him down. They find him hiding in the church, and they capture him and put him in jail. And this thing takes all week long. And he's crucified on Friday evening. The interesting thing about this is that the young kids who perform as Pharisees do this for 40 days. They beg for all the food that they eat. They are not allowed to bathe. When they're wearing their mask, they are not allowed to speak. They cannot see their wives or girlfriends. And at the end of the ceremony on Saturday, after Christ is crucified on Friday night, they don't really crucify him. It's an act. It's a play. It's an act. Okay? It's theater. The mask is burned in a rite of purification. The dancers believe that their mask has absorbed evil, and the mask has to be destroyed. And I did not include that, by the way, in this film clip. Let's watch the celebration of Semana Santa by the Mayo Indians, not Maya, Mayo, in Sonora. not so obvious what's going on there, but I actually was holding the camera, and when they had these sticks and they were coming up toward the front door of the church, they were trying to smell Jesus' trail. They were trying to locate him by scent, and they were. I don't know if you noticed, they were sniffing their sticks, and then I was standing right on the door of the church, and they were down on their hands and knees sniffing the ground, going, "Oh yeah, he's in here. He must be right. He's inside the church." And they captured him. They put Jesus in the character who was playing Jesus. They put him in jail inside the church, and then on Friday when they were pounding the sticks on the sand, that's the trail they're making for Jesus to be marched out of church to Calvary to be crucified. The next dance is the dance of the viejitos, little old men. On the surface, it looks like this dance is just purely entertainment, but it actually originated as a very, very religious dance. The natives in the area of Michoacan, being extremely poor, had nothing tangible to give to the church in honor of the baby Jesus at Christmas time, and so they decided to dance for him. And the dance is actually performed first inside the church and then outside the church. I'm going to show you two different dances of the viejos, both of which were performed in the church. I didn't film it inside the church because it wouldn't be appropriate, and so I shot the dance outside in front of the church. The masks are actually depicting. They're humorous. They depict old men, European looking old men. Actually, it's one here. Right? And that's because the natives thought that the Spaniards looked funny when they got old, because they had gray hair and their teeth would fall out and they would get real wrinkly skin. So these masks are actually depictions of old Spaniards. All right? So let's look at that dance. Two versions of the same dance. next dance is the dance of the Diablos. People don't realize that Mexico has a fairly substantially large black population. Blacks were brought over in the early colonial period as slaves to replace the indigenous population that had been decimated with disease, and there's still a large population in the Costa Chica of Mexico. That's an area, that's like saying the Midwest. That's an area in the Sierra Madres that includes Guerrero, south of Acapulco, and Oaxaca. And this is a dance performed by Afro-mestizos. The dancers, if you could take off their mask and look at them, you would think you're in Haiti or Jamaica. They're Mexican blacks. They speak Spanish, not a native language. The dance is performed, this dance, the dance of the Diablos, is performed at Day of the Dead. I shot this maybe 4 years ago in a dance festival in Puerto Escondido, which is a beach resort in Oaxaca. And I was standing at the edge of the stage with a camera, and the Minga character, the terrible woman character, who's danced by a man, saw me and mugged the camera. And I apologize if it's offensive to anybody, but it's all in good fun. This is called the Dance of the Diablos. It's dedicated, by the way, the dance is dedicated to Ruja, which is a Yoruban god. They dance, before they perform this dance, they actually pray to Ruja. It's quite interesting.
Ya se van los diablos bailando este son. Ya se van los diablos bailando este son. Le estamos bailando al señor Garzón. Le estamos bailando al señor Garzón. ¡Ruja! No te vas a caer, mi amor. No te vas a caer. Se van los diablos.
the last dance I'll show you is the dance of the Moors and Christians. The Spaniards were still celebrating the expulsion of the Islamic Moors from the Iberian Peninsula when the conquistadores arrived in New Spain, in Mexico. Remember that just 30 years before Cortes reached Tenochtitlan, the same year that Columbus discovered America, the final battle was taking place in Granada that drove the Moors back to North Africa after 700 years of their occupying the Iberian Peninsula. This was a major victory for Rome and the Catholic faith and was celebrated in Spain with masked dancing, a reenactment of the victory of Catholicism over Islam. What better way to dramatize the domination of the Catholic faith over other faiths than to perform this victory dance, if you will, for the impressionable Mexican natives? And it didn't take long before the newly baptized natives began to perform the dance of the Moors and Christians. And this dance is still probably the most widely performed dance throughout Mexico. Many variations of the dance of the Moors and Christians. I might add, it also continues to be performed in Spain and Portugal, the American Southwest, and the Philippines, where there was a Spanish Catholic evangelization. This is a modern version of the dance from Naulingo, Veracruz. The Moors are on the right, Christians on the left, and the Christians are led by Señor Santiago, St. James, the patron saint of Spain, Santiago de Compostela. He's riding a white horse. It's a battle between good and evil, Christians and Moors.
Quizá ningún otro objeto refleje la verdadera naturaleza de la cultura indígena, la ceremonia y la complejidad espiritual de los mexicanos, como lo hace la máscara de la danza. Las celebraciones con máscaras se remontan a los tiempos prehispánicos y en la actualidad todavía juegan un papel importante en la religión y en la vida de las comunidades de muchos mexicanos. Las máscaras son capaces de transformar o revelar la identidad de quienes las utilizan. Cuando se usan en danzas rituales, personifican el misticismo, la magia y la tradición de la cultura que las ha creado. Las motivaciones de la comunidad para una danza de máscaras pueden incluir la necesidad de mantener promesas religiosas, invocar asistencia sobrenatural para la comunidad, dar las gracias por cosechas que se obtuvieron o simplemente expresar la devoción hacia un santo. Admiramos las máscaras mexicanas, no solo por su valor plástico intrínseco, sino porque están profundamente ligadas al fervor, a la ética y al vigor con el que un pueblo se viste para definirse a sí mismo, y para mostrar en las mil caras de sus máscaras su capacidad expresiva y sus profundas raíces culturales.